What's up, guys? Welcome back to Principles of Performance. My name's Cam. Today, I want to touch on, the ethos of my business. I have conversations with a lot of coaches, clinicians, and even just general population lifters, whether they're beginner all the way through to seasoned. And a lot of the same topics keep coming up in those circles. And I see it a lot in YouTube comment sections, Facebook comment sections and stuff. And I wanted to touch on why I called my business Principles of Performance. Because I firmly believe that principles trump prescription. To give you an example, I had a really cool conversation with one of my friends and fellow sort of colleagues in the industry yesterday about arse to grass squatting. And the conversation simply was based around the level of ignorance, not a bad thing, ignorance is ignorance. The level of ignorance that comes with just general movement principles in general, and why it depends is such an often used answer. And sometimes I feel like it's used because someone doesn't actually know how to explain and identify the reasons behind why they've prescribed something like an arse to grass or a box squat. So let's quickly touch on it. When we're talking about developing strength, the principles of strength are just your ability to produce force against an extrinsic object. So if we're thinking about squatting, we're producing force against a barbell in the hopes that we'll be able to produce more force against just our body weight when we're outside of the gym. So if we're running in a straight line, then we're utilizing that extra neural drive that we might be getting from developing those neural pathways under a barbell. So we've now taken ourselves out of that extrinsic load and we're utilizing that new either muscle tissue or that new neural tissue to express more force. So the principles of strength are just developing the capacity to express force. And we use strength training for that. But we need to be able to work within ranges to do that, ranges of motion. Whether you've got X amount of range of motion or not, it can matter when it comes down to prescribing the right exercise for the right task. For example, if you don't have the range of motion to get into an arse to grass squat, then asking you to do it may actually be maladaptive to your ability to produce force against that barbell and therefore your ability to produce force outside of the gym. So arse to grass squatting seems to be something that a lot of people strive for. They want to get there, but there's a lot of questions about how to do it. Essentially, if you don't have the range of motion, you can develop the range of motion. There's no question about it. There may be some barriers along the way, some anthropomorphic barriers along the way. For example, your hips might be retroverted or antiverted, which just means that the torsion in your hips has rotated in the frontal plane either forwards or backwards, which has closed off your ability to access either internal or external rotation, depending on whether you've rotated forwards or backwards in that frontal plane. Now, if that's the case, you're going to have problems fed from the hip getting depth in your squat. But let's take the hips out of it. Let's say you've got great hips. If you're missing some range at your tibiofemoral joint, if you're missing the internal or external range required to access your femoral rotation in a closed chain environment, have I lost you yet? If I have, that's great. It means that there's something to learn here. If you've lost that rotation at that tibiofemoral joint, then you're going to find it hard to access the rotation further up the chain, even if you've got it all in an open chain environment. If your hips are perfect, but you're missing that range at your tibiofemoral joint, you're not going to be able to access that range at your hip in a closed chain environment. Same for the ankle. If you're missing some range in the sagittal plane, either dorsiflexion or plantar flexion, or you're missing some subtalar range, you're going to find it hard to access that tibiofemoral joint and or that hip. And that's just the lower half of the chain. So when we understand the principles that go into, let's say, movement, right? We're talking about ranges of motion. When we understand the principles that are there and we're able to identify what someone can and can't do, which is the whole basis we have around screening and assessment, we want to find out what someone can do rather than chuck them into a program and find out what they can't do. That comes with inherent risk. We want to mitigate risk. when we find out what someone can do, that's the principles that we're adhering to in terms of screening and assessment, understanding movement, then the prescription takes care of itself. The best coaches in the world understand that the difference between an arse to grass squat and a box squat comes down to specificity of application. We can load a box squat with potentially more weight, more load, because we're accessing less range, which means we're stronger in those ranges, we're able to access more tissue based on length and tension, another principle. Whereas if somebody's got the range for an arse to grass squat, there's no reason why we couldn't put them through a block of box squatting just so that they can learn to tolerate more load. Similarly, if somebody doesn't have the range for an arse to grass squat, let's say a powerlifter who's used to doing a low bar, hips back, more seated squat because of the specificity required for the sport, there's no reason why we couldn't apply some more range of motion training to that individual in order to give them a little bit more healthy tissue range for their more specific squat. Neither is better, it's just that the specificity will dictate the application. But when we understand the principles that underpin either of the squats or a bench press or a deadlift, when we understand those principles, the prescription takes care of itself. And so I'm hoping that we can address an often asked question, which is the best exercise for ... by explaining that it depends on the principles at play. We need to understand that there are principles of force production, there are principles of movement, there are principles of specificity and in terms of training and sport. And when we understand those principles at a foundation level, the prescription takes care of itself. If you don't understand those principles, please reach out. Ask me. If I don't have the answer, I can refer you to someone that does. But this is the whole point of my business ethos. Principles before prescription, principles of performance. Performance is just a measurable behavioral output that we can take a snapshot in time of any output that you have, whether it's capacity driven or competency based. We can take a picture and we can say, is this good for what we're trying to develop? Yes or no? If it is, let's move on. If it's not, then the prescription that I apply needs to be able to be measured after X amount of time, and then we should be able to go back to that snapshot, compare it to another snapshot, and be able to say, hey, we've gotten better. But not only in the gym, we need to be able to be confident in the transference. We need to say, hey, not only have you gotten better in the gym at this thing that we've screened and assessed you for, but we've also seen positive transference to the sport. If we can tick those boxes, then we've adhered to the principles that underpin performance, and we've adhered to the ethos of principles before prescription. Principles before prescription just means that there is no best exercise for ... It simply means, hey, based on this snapshot in time, this person can't do this. We need them to be able to do this. Let's see if we can improve that, and then monitor the transference to the thing that they're trying to improve outside of the gym. I hope that clears up some of that stuff. It's a great conversation that I love having with people when they're ready and open to have it. If you're someone that's not too confident with their, say, functional anatomy or their understandings of biomechanics and movement, or even their neuromuscular understandings, please reach out. I have so much time on my hands because of COVID, so I'd be happy to run you through some stuff. If you're someone that's interested in coaching or even being coached, please reach out. I run small courses and little bits of mentorships along the way, and also I've got an online training program that I run people through, so I'd be more than happy to help out there as well. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you on the next one. What are your thoughts on all of this? Have you got any questions, or have you got any topics that you'd like me to touch on relating back to this principles before prescriptions ethos? If so, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thanks.